state of Arkansas. In 2018, he was reelected with 65% of the vote, having received more votes than any other candidate for governor in the state's history. He's won recognition for the state as a leader in computer science education. He's cut taxes by $150 million and signed a law that exempts the retirement pay of veterans from state income tax. Under his economic development policy, 70,000 more people are working in Arkansas than when he took office. And he has signed incentive agreements with nearly 400 companies that were expanding or opening in the state. He was appointed by President Ronald Reagan as U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, and in 1996, he won the first of 3 successive terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. During his 3rd term in Congress, President George Bush appointed him Director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and later as Undersecretary in the newly created Department of Homeland Security. Governor Hutchinson grew up on a small farm in Gravette. He's a graduate of the University of Arkansas Law School, and he and his wife, Susan, have been married for 45 years. They have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. And I can say, Governor, this has probably been the most challenging year during your governorship, but we appreciate your continuing hard work on all of our behalf. And so we're thrilled today to have Governor Hutchinson to address our group. Please join me in welcoming Governor Asa Hutchinson.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you for your leadership of the Arkansas Better Business Bureau, and for all who have joined here today to remember the importance of business and ethics in business. And that's critically important in every generation, and particularly the one in which we live. I also want to congratulate the award recipients that you have deserved the recognition of your leadership in business and business ethics. I think it's safe to say that it's been a very tough year for entrepreneurs. It's been a tough year for people in business this year all across our nation because of the pandemic and because of what it means to consumer confidence, what it means in terms of business disruption, and that includes new additional health rules that you've never had to deal with before. And so it has been a challenging year, but I want to assure you I'm not any stranger to national emergencies. And yes, I was not prepared for a pandemic when I became governor. But I have had a lot of experience with other types of emergencies. Going back to when I was United States Attorney in the 80s and having to negotiate with a national terrorist organization in the hills of Arkansas, moving forward to the time I was Administrator of the DEA in the Bush administration during the time of the 9/11 attack. And then following the attack, the President asked me to go over to Homeland Security and leading with Secretary Ridge the national effort to protect the United States from a terrorist attack. And so I've been there during national emergencies and have had to deal with all that it brings. In fact, those are not easy times. And if I went to a doctor and the doctor said, Asa, I've got some bad news for you. You have a terminal illness and you only have 1 year to live. So tell me how you want to spend the last year of your life. I would just say, well, let me spend it at Homeland Security because that was the longest year of my life. You could probably say the same thing about the last 6 months as governor. And so they are certainly challenging times in which we live. But there's obviously a difference between the fight against terrorism and dealing with a pandemic. Terrorism is carried out by people with the intent to kill. But a virus is spread by innocent people with no intent to harm. So it's a big difference in what we're having to deal with today. And so despite those differences, though, leadership in a crisis follow the same principles and guidance and leadership qualities. And so I thought it might be worthwhile just for a few minutes this morning to reflect back on 2 emergencies that I've had to deal with and to look at some of the leadership qualities that I believe are common in any crisis. And I hope it has some application to businesses, because you have to provide the same type of leadership, not always in an emergency situation, but you have to provide that same type of leadership in your business. And there are some parallels. And the first lesson that I see in terms of leadership in a crisis is have a strategy. Now, that's not always a strategy you can develop in advance. It's a strategy that you develop based upon the circumstances in which you find yourself and the nature of the emergency. And if you don't mind me telling a couple of stories, whenever I was at Homeland Security, I was Undersecretary for Border and Transportation Security, which meant that I was responsible for all shipments, movement of people, and cargo into the United States, planes, container shipments, border crossings, and trains, to make sure that there was not a weapon of mass destruction or individual terrorists that were coming into our country. And so early on, I was briefed by our military attaché as to all of my responsibilities and all of the opportunities for terrorists to take action. And so it was all the cargo movements, the planes, the container shipments, and it all totaled up to 1.3 billion transactions a year that I had to guard against. So the Chief of Staff sent me a note, Bruce Lawler, and it just said, "Asa, 1.3 billion transactions, how do you like your odds?" And that was a very poignant question, because I had to stop terrorists making sure every one of those were free from a weapon, and they can only win one time and they succeed, and we've got to be perfect all the time. But whenever you look at that kind of a challenge, you say, well, what's the strategy to get it done? And we started with a strategy. And the strategy at Homeland Security was partnerships with limited government action, which was, we're not telling the business how high to build the fence. We're saying develop a strategic security plan so that you can protect your national security asset. It's about data and getting information and data and analytics and a utilization of technology to make sure that you know who is crossing the border, what the containers that are coming in, and analyzing that. So we had a strategy that we implemented. And obviously your strategy in fighting a pandemic is different, but we have a strategy. Some people might be surprised to know that we have a strategy. We talk about it, but it's a simple strategy, but it's a strategy that is absolutely essential. And the strategy is stop the spread of the virus, not by shutting down businesses, but by emphasizing individual responsibility, a fundamental part of the strategy that we're implementing. And we make a mistake if we want to shut businesses down, and people ask me the question, well, is it going to potentially spread the virus more if we actually go back to school? Well, yes, that's true. But you can't just shut down life. You've got to go ahead and have business. You just have to do it with individual responsibility, and that is a key part of the strategy. Secondly, it is the same. It's use of data and technology. It is about testing, it is about analytics, it's about tracing and building that infrastructure that we can deal with the virus. It is about assuring adequate hospital space and healthcare resources to meet the healthcare needs of our citizens so they have a place to go if they get sick. Those are the fundamental parts. There's more aspects to it, but those are the fundamental parts of a strategy that we are utilizing to meet this emergency. The second characteristic is that a leader has to realize the urgency of the moment. It is an emergency. You have to act quickly, and delay is the enemy of success. During an emergency, delay can be costly. On my first day at Homeland Security, I was in the NAC, the Nebraska Avenue Complex in Washington, D.C. First day on the job. You've got to realize I was in Congress, I've been a lawyer. I come in there, I go sit at my desk, and my operations chief comes to me and says, "Mr. Secretary, a plane has just been hijacked in Cuba. It is headed toward the airspace of the United States. We do not know its intention. What action do you want us to take?" And you just look around and think, who's going to answer that question? Nothing in my background prepared me to answer that question. But a leader simply acts with urgency, but you get all the information you can from all the people in the room who might have been through this before, and you develop a plan of action. I usually leave the audience hanging and don't tell you the rest of the story, but since you might have an interest, we guided that airplane into a site that is safe away from the population. We had jets that accompanied it in, and we resolved the situation. But you have to be able to act. You can't be frozen. And during this pandemic, someone said, "Wow, you have to make a lot of unpopular decisions." And my response was, all of my decisions are unpopular. And there's a lot of truth to that a leader has to act with urgency with the information that they have and recognize not everybody's going to like that. But that is absolutely essential during a time of emergency. You act on the best information that you have at hand. Two of the most challenging decisions that I had to make during this pandemic, and there might be more, but the first one was when the pressure from the national media was simply, when are you going to shelter in place? When are you going to shut the economy down? Every state has done that. 40 states have done that. Are you going to be the last one to shut your economy down and to order shelter in place? I resisted that because the data did not show that would make a difference, and it would cause a great deal of problem in terms of lost jobs, lost revenue, families without income, and the heartache that goes with it. And so we balanced it, had a targeted approach to it. The second challenge and decision was what I already alluded to, and that is, how should you start school this year? How should you start school? The pressure not to start school, the pressure not to have in-classroom instruction. And yes, we offered virtual instruction as an option, but it was important for us to have in-classroom instruction as an option for parents and children as well, because they can learn best in that environment. And so we made that tough decision, not always popular, but I believe it was necessary, and hopefully that will be the last tough decision I have to make, but maybe not. The third parallel or principle that I would derive is that the public must buy into the strategy. If you're a leader shouting out a strategy and nobody accepts it, then you're not doing any good. And I'll never forget when I went to Kansas, after we announced our strategy at Homeland Security about we want to have alert levels, and you'll remember some of these. You have your yellow alert level, you have your orange alert level, and you have your red alert level. And that governed how we respond as a society based upon the level of terrorist threat at the time. So I go into Kansas to make a speech, and after the speech, the CEO of Klondike Trucking Company came up to me, and they laid 3 placards down right in front of me. One was yellow, one was orange, and one was red. And they say, based upon the threat level, we put our placards out in our warehouse with instructions as to what the security guidelines are for that day. And I said, wow, the public bought in to the strategy. And the same thing is true as people ask me, well, why in the world are you doing daily updates? Well, because I want the public to understand our strategy and the importance of wearing a mask and why we're making these decisions and social distancing, wanting the public to buy into a strategy that we're trying to implement. Hopefully, and I believe, we've had some success in that area. Fourth principle is that partnerships are essential to success. Whether you're in the private sector or whether you are in government trying to meet the requirements of an emergency, you can't do it alone. Our partners in this pandemic have been the hospitals, the healthcare workers that have performed so admirably and courageously. Our partners have been the General Assembly that have helped us to fund what we need. Our partners has been the federal government that has given us stimulus money to keep our economy moving at a faster pace. When it comes to Homeland Security, our partners were in a more global sense. It was France, it was England, it was Mexico, it was Canada that we shared daily information with, and we could not have been successful in protecting our country without those kind of partnerships that was absolutely essential. And then, fifthly, is don't hide the truth. Truth is the friend of a leader. People want to hear the truth. They want to hear honesty. They want to hear an admission of error when that occurs. And a leader will make errors from time to time. And so you've got to be able to be honest. You've got to be truthful as you lead with your employees, with your patrons, with your customers. That's what's critical. And again, you share the good and the bad with them. And so leaders, have a strategy. Realize the urgency of the moment. Remember that your consumers must accept the strategy that you develop. Always appreciate the partnerships that help you carry out your mission. And remember that truth is your friend. Those are important principles, I think, in business and ethics. And let me end by saying that the most important lesson that I've experienced in the last 6 months is that I've seen the innovation and the generosity of businesses here in Arkansas. They have supported one another. They have supported me. They have supported the mission of trying to protect each other from this virus. And I appreciate what they've done. And I'll conclude with a story that illustrates that point. I went to Iowa to make another speech. And this was after 9/11. This is after the World Trade Center came down. And I was in Iowa, and this lady came up and shared a story with me. She was a businesswoman who owned an exterior outdoor lighting equipment that they rented out, for huge events, outdoor lighting. And as soon as she saw the World Trade Center collapse, she got her workers and her drivers and her equipment together and said, I want you to go to New York because you've got what they need. And they said, well, what do we do? Just go. And she launched them out in the darkness of night, traveled all night to get to Manhattan. And of course, when the drivers got there, everything was cordoned off. Nobody could get in there. They just had to park, and they called her and said, what do we do now? We're here. And she says, just stay there. I'm going to pray. She prayed, and soon someone knocked on the driver's door, said, what are y'all doing here? And they said, we've got outdoor lighting equipment. We're told to come. And they said, you got exactly what we need. Come on in. They answered the call. That to me is America. It is business. It is innovation. It is generosity. Thank you all.